College here in Harlingen. Really excited to be here today. For those of you who don't know, my name's Derek Drozd. I'm the Director of Operations for Velocity Texas. Velocity Texas is a nonprofit foundation that's based in San Antonio. We serve companies all across South Texas, really helping to advance life sciences and technology. And for those who may not have been to our campus in San Antonio, we have a 12-acre campus, which is highlighted in orange behind me. Really excited that our current first phase of development is almost finished with construction. So we have one building left that should be finished in the next 1 to 2 months. It's 6 BSL-2 level labs. We have a couple different big anchor tenants that are on our campus that are doing advanced stem cell manufacturing. We also have a bank and a law firm headquarters as well that are part of this first stage of development. And then as we go to phase 2 of development, which you can see behind me, there's plans for close to 700,000 square feet of office and lab space. So we're really excited for what's to come. Really, the vision of our foundation is to bring together the academic institutions, the private sector companies, and then your military medical sector as well. Really bringing all of those 3 sectors together so that the silos are broken down and true collaboration and innovation can take place. And so what brings us here today, as Linda mentioned, is a partnership that's in place with Velocity Texas and Methodist Healthcare Ministries. And we're really helping to promote the social determinants of health. For those who may not be as familiar as what the social determinants are, they're the non-medical factors that influence a person's health. And you can see that behind me on the screen. That ranges from access to education, the quality of education, access to affordable healthcare, someone's neighborhood or community context, economic stability as well. And so those are some of the different factors that we're looking at, as well as helping to provide educational programming to not just enhance awareness of that, but also enhance the innovative solutions that might address some of these problems. And so that's what brings us here today. So today is one session out of a 10-part series that's leading up to an accelerator program that's going to take place in the fall of 2024 in San Antonio. So each of these monthly sessions, we bring in a guest speaker who has expertise on a topic that pertains to building a successful business, ultimately enhancing that commercialization process, especially if they're in the social determinants field. And so each of these sessions, like Linda mentioned, they're located throughout the Rio Grande Valley, free and open to the public. We did our first 3 sessions in Brownsville. They started last September. And then we're doing the next 3 here in Harlingen. And then the last 3 sessions of the series will be in. So we've got to continue to engage in these series. In terms of the accelerator program itself, we have applications currently open. So if you do have a company that has a solution to some of these social determinants of health problems, we encourage you to apply to that. It will be a cohort of 4 companies that are selected over the coming months, and the programming will take place in San Antonio. So these companies will get great access to mentors, they'll have an access to an entrepreneur and residents on staff, people who have that experience, really kind of been there and done that with companies to help you advance where you're currently at. There will also be a lot of networking opportunities with entrepreneurs in the San Antonio space. You'll get access to talk with some of the leadership at Methodist Healthcare Ministries as well, pitch coaching and all of that as well. With that, I'd like to introduce today's speaker, Alfred Mesquiti. Alfred's a fantastic presenter. He's got a really great ability to create awesome pitch decks. I'm excited that you all get to hear from him today. With that, I'll hand it over to Alfred and let him take you through how to build a pitch.
Thank you, Derek. Hi, everybody. I'm thrilled to be down here in the Valley supporting founders and entrepreneurs like yourselves. And I'm thankful that it's hosted by the chamber here, as well as Methodist Healthcare Ministries and Velocity Texas. What I'm here today to tell you about is crafting your pitch. And so I'll give you a caveat that I am going to be talking about this from a very specific angle where I'm in the world of venture capital. So think of like Shark Tank and raising money to build your business. This is the type of pitches that I'll be talking about today, but they're also applicable to other types of pitches. We're going to cover a little bit of the differences today, as well as some things to keep in mind when you are not only pitching verbally, but also how you do that within the pitch deck or in the presentation, as well as how you integrate story and narrative in there. Before that, the first thing to ask is the obvious question of really, who am I? And I'm not here to say that just so I can talk about myself. The reason I thinking, wow, that was really cool. I didn't know that, I didn't know about this concept or this idea. But you learned something new and you were curious about it, or maybe you changed your opinion about something after you were informed about it. That was the goal of that presentation. And so really everything else, every presentation could be a pitch, but without a call to action, the pitch is going to be incomplete. And so again, we will go a little bit deeper into this. I will try not to confuse you too much, but we'll have some time for questions as well. And I hope this can be helpful. Let's try to click on the next one. Almost there. Okay, and so yeah, so that's the role I go, which is investment pitches. So again, that may be, I may use some jargon or some words that might go a little bit over your head, but don't worry, this is stuff I had to learn when I fell into this industry myself. So I'll give you say you are a founder, and maybe you are building the next Facebook or something, right? You have to raise capital to build that business. So you find yourself in a position to do that. Many founders may not be raising initially, but they may find themselves in a position where they need to raise because you have to hire people, you have to go to market really quickly, you need to beat out a competitor. So you may find yourself in a position where you will be pitching for investment versus just pitching for another stakeholder or partner. But we can use those two examples and still talk about that. How do you actually do that? How do you raise the capital? What does that look like? The first, what you have to do is tell a really compelling story about who you are, what you're working on, what you're building, and your vision for how you want to change the world with your idea or your product or your service or your venture. You need to get those on the other side of your audience to really relate to what it is that you're doing, be familiar with it, even if it's in an industry they're not completely familiar with. And you want them to really align with your vision and your ideas and to rally to your cause. And so there are a lot of moving parts that you have to manage in that process. But maybe you have a great idea, you've written it down, you have a narrative. How do you actually move to the next step? What does that look like? Well, your next tool typically is going to be what's called a pitch deck. And pitch decks, they're presentations, but they are very specific presentations again with that conversion goal of moving the needle in terms of ultimately getting someone to invest in you. And these will typically be slide decks. They don't have to be slide decks. They can be videos or websites or landing pages. I've even seen some interesting pitch decks nowadays that use Notion, which is like a note-taking, like Google Docs type of app, but you can get creative there. And founders get really creative. I told them to keep in mind to start with a presentation because on the investment side of it, you typically have more older demographic that's used to like a PowerPoint or PDF or something. So it's a good starting point, and we'll cover the basics on that. So I'll give you an overview of a pitch deck. You can read this this definition as I speak. But basically, a pitch deck is an investment presentation. It's a presentation that's used to solicit investment from your investment audience or a venture capitalist or somebody who has money that they are looking to invest. And again, it's also known as an investment presentation. Now, knowing what a pitch deck is, the next natural question is what structure should I follow? So what goes into a pitch deck? How many slides should it be? What do I need to cover? Natural question, right? The answer, though, is going to be a little bit complicated. So I don't know if you can read this, but like all the different example types of like, what to include, like our problem, our solution, the marketing plan, information about the team, the how much money we're raising, do we have any stellar advisors on our team, what does the market look like? Lots of different angles that we can go. And what this table represents, and it's intended to be really complicated and kind of scare you because you're going to get a different answer depending on who you ask. So this table, if we ask these really huge fonts, so think of like Sequoia Capital, which is based out in Silicon Valley, and they invest in all these super B2B SaaS type of products. So think of like Facebook's or apps. They're raising money too in order to build their product. And so they have to pitch to these types of investors, or they're pitching like Mark Cuban or Guy Kawasaki, or who are these like really prolific venture capitalists who are also the ones that are investing in these businesses. Also here on the right, these are some examples of actual businesses where if I looked at their investment presentation, what did they include in there? How many slides was it? So Airbnb's was like 13, and Front, which is one we'll talk about, had 21 slides in it. So, really like it's across the board, right? So when you ask that question, like the answer is going to be like, so I'll tell you good luck. But I don't want to scare you. So what we can do is we can go back and look at that table. Let's kind of find some patterns first to kind of figure out. I don't like ambiguous answers. I like to be more definitive in finding, what we can, finding something that we can work with as we move forward. So first, let's look at some patterns. So the big circles here, like, is where they all agree. So they all agree on three things: talking about the problem that you're solving, talking about the solution that you're providing, as well as talking about the team, talking about yourself. And that makes sense. I think that's kind of a no-brainer. What do they generally agree on? Meaning they may not all agree on it, but what do they generally agree on? So that's in the blue here. So they say to talk about your business model. So how are you making money, right? How do you actually, how is this a business? How is it not a hobby? What does the competition look like? So are there other people out there doing the same thing you are? Or are you the only one in your market doing something? If you're raising money, actually, and you say like, nobody else is doing this, and we're the first to market, that may actually scare your investor because it may not mean that it's a problem worth solving. Like if nobody else is doing this, then is it really a problem that needs to be solved that people would pay for? So think about, don't be so quick to be like first to market on things, but you still should talk about your competition. And they also say to agree on the track more, but so we have some general ideas of what to include, but it's still a little bit confusing, right? Why is there a big variance in the answers? And the reason is that it really depends on where you are in your business in terms of building it out. So if you are really just starting out as an entrepreneur or a startup founder, for example, and if you're raising money, you're at very early stages. So maybe you're raising money from like your aunt or somebody who has some cash flow, or maybe you're talking to angel investors who are, within an entrepreneurial community, there's going to be a smaller group of investors who maybe they sold their businesses, they're retired, but they learned the ropes of entrepreneurship, and they probably have some money to invest in businesses locally. Those are called your angel investors. And you may be having some conversations with them, maybe not even from raising money standpoint, but just for some advice. But it's good to have them in your network. But what you're going to be talking about at those early stages are things like the problem and the solution, more specifically, and your big vision, where you may have this idea that you validate, meaning you can prove that there's a need in the market, but you still have to build one. You may not have any paying customers, or it may be a really crappy like 1.0 version of the product that you have, where maybe the investor is going to hate it, but they're going to like you, right? So that's still part of the conversation. So what you're doing is you're doing a lot of vision building, and you're what we call FOMO, like fear of missing out. So you want to get somebody to kind of salivate about what it is that you're working on to kind of commit to your cause, and even if they're not offering capital, maybe they could be an advisor to your business, or maybe join your board or something, or give you some advice. What if you're later stage, like Facebook or some of these companies that have been around for a while, but they're still raising money in one way or another if they didn't go public? That's a very different conversation. What you have to talk about more is proof, meaning traction here is like financial proof, like showing we signed up X number of new customers last month, or we have we're generating multiples more in revenue each month. We're growing really fast, but we need more capital to hire more people and to build the next phase of our product. So it's a different conversation at that point. And so this is why, again, the variance is going to be different. So a lot of early stage pitch decks could be 6 slides. These later stage ones have to show milestones. So those could be 30 slides or longer. That's really where that variance comes in and why you're going to get such a different answer. So I know that's still frustrating. So what I'll do is I'm going to give you the rubric that I use when I'm looking at these presentations, and I'll give you some examples of how they look also. So when you are incorporating that in your pitch, you'll get an idea of what to work with. So this is the general investment pitch deck structure. This is not mine. It's from a book that I highly recommend called Get Backed.
What's it called?
It's called Get Backed. And we can go over that too at the end if you want to check it out. It's a great book to check out where you are learning to build these types of presentations for the first time. You're not sure where to start. It gives you a great rubric, which we'll talk about here, as well as it goes into the necessities for talking about your story of what you're building, as well as visuals you can use when you're building your next presentation and how these can all help. And so we'll cover that a little more in depth. The first thing that we included, so these aren't, there's 10 points here, but this doesn't mean 10 slides. This is a starting point for you to get an idea of what can I start to write down and include as I put together this piece. So first is the overview. So your business in a nutshell. What do I talk about, and how do I how would I put that, for example, on a slide or in a paragraph? Next is the opportunity. So this a lot is the vision. So maybe you have a vision to create like a flying car or something. That's the end goal, and so you need to kind of go backwards and think about how are we going to get to the end goal. Where do we start today, and what does that look like in terms of starting the business, making money with our first customers, and the opportunity there. Then we obviously talk about the problem, right? So the big problem that my business is solving in the marketplace. Why do people pay me for this product or service that I'm working on, or why would they pay? That's the problem. That's the pain in the market right now. When you really grasp the pain and talk about that, that's really where you start to connect on an emotional level with your audience versus just throwing out a bunch of jargon or information about a problem that nobody cares about. We want them to care. Then you talk about obviously the solution. So what does the world look like if you hit all your goals and have your product or service bought and enjoyed by millions of people? What does the world look like? How do we get there? And how do you want to get other people to be part of that vision that you're working on? Traction here just means customers. So again, if you're really, maybe depending on the business or the stage that you're in, maybe you currently don't have any paying customers, but you have a great idea. That's okay. You could talk about the validation. Like, I interviewed 30 people over the weekend with this idea I had for and they all said, yeah, they paid me $10 to do it. So maybe you need some help on building it, right? You can talk to somebody in an entrepreneurial circle or venture capitalist or somebody who has those connections or that capital to help you get to the next stage on actually building something if you want, because you demonstrated that there's good traction and validation of your idea. The market. So what does the market look like? Maybe we can make millions off of the market of maybe it's a pet product for dog owners or something. What does that look like? How many dog owners live here locally, if it's a local thing, or how many nationally or globally, if I'm targeting a certain segment? That's what the market is. The competition. So again, we talked about direct or indirect, first to market. Are there other people doing this? How do I do it better? All of those points. Business model again is how do I make money? Is this a subscription that I'm selling to somebody? Is it a one-time purchase and maybe I try to upsell them with something else down the road? Is there a fee that we extract when we sell this to them? What does that look like? That's going to be a question that you will tend to get. What does the team look like? Who's building this? Why are we the ones that are really going to get to the finish line? Or why are we the ones that are going to right ship when everything goes wrong, right? So again, getting someone to align with you and to believe in you first and foremost versus the product or service that you're building, that can change, especially at the early stages. And then use of funds. So specifically, if you're building or if you're raising capital, what are you going to do with the money? Where are you going to invest it in? Are you going to hire more people? Are you going to invest in a distributor or packaging? What does that look like? And so again, all of these points, I specifically am not here to tell you how do you do the market research, or what's the best pricing model, or what are the development costs associated with that. What I'm here to tell you more about is how do you communicate that information. Otherwise, we would be here for like 3 or 4 hours. But that's the goal there. And there's one more element of all of this, which is story. Your story is, the visual I'm using is like a thread that's woven throughout this type of presentation, because the story is what gives your actual pitch and the this piece identity. It gives it life. It's the lifeblood of the presentation, and it gets all this kind of boring stuff. It gives it some life and excitement. It's going to get somebody to really connect and figure out, oh, I don't have to be an expert in cloud-based servers, but I understand what you're doing and I understand why you're doing it. Like, that's really the goal on the story side of it. And we'll cover that briefly as well. So, oops. Make sure it's me. Going back to the presentation really quick. Okay, so pitches and pitch decks, they're all based on this concept called the elevator pitch. So say you are in an elevator and you notice it's some really rich, I keep using Mark Cuban as the example, but somebody who could change the course of your business. Maybe it's a mentor, somebody that you want to get in front of because you think it can help your business. How do you talk about your business in like 30 seconds or up to like 2 minutes? That's what the elevator pitch is. That's the starting point for all entrepreneurs when you are learning to pitch. Start from there and try to talk about what you're doing in terms of the problem, the solution, the market that we talked about in a nutshell. That's a really hard thing to do, and that's going to take a lot of practice. I mean, it's not something you're going to be able to do easily. It's okay. That's the challenge there. But what you learn to do as you keep practicing this is that you remember that you are always going to be pitched. As an entrepreneur, as a founder, you may not even be up, because you never know what opportunities might arise. Where you meet somebody who can be a big vector in changing your business, either through financial help, or maybe they know somebody who can join your team, that can maybe like a CTO or something, or they can be a great mentor. And so always be open to those opportunities, and always be comfortable with the idea that you're always going to be pitching, you're always going to be iterating and changing this and testing out different ideas on people, because you're going to get different types of responses. And that's why we use a pitch deck versus like a business plan. Business plans are very rigid and inflexible, but they're also very applicable to certain types of businesses. But the world I live in with startups and with capital raises, pitch decks are much more flexible because the ideas may change very quickly. So you need something that's going to change with that. And even we call it pivot. The way that you are attacking the market currently may not be what you're doing tomorrow, because you have new insight and new ideas on how to do that. So the pitch deck then, giving some examples here. So how do we actually, what do some of these slides look like? And how do we actually present that type of information? So this is a little bit more where I'm nerding out on the presentation side of things, because I live and breathe presentations all the time. So how do you actually like put something up on the screen that's gonna facilitate what it is you're talking about versus distract people and get them to like read and zone out? And it's going to depend on a lot of different things. We'll cover some of those variations. The first to keep in mind is the mantra I want to give you whenever you're making any presentation is to always try to keep things legible, simple, and obvious. So these 3 words, these are not from me. This is from a startup accelerator out in Silicon Valley called Y Combinator. So they take a lot of these early stage companies and founders, and they invest in them both with capital as well as mentorship. And they all have to like pitch their company at the end, called like a demo day. They have to showcase the business and what they're working on, and they pitch to an audience of investors and other people from broad backgrounds. And they say, keep it legible, simple, obvious. Always try to make it a conversation versus using a lot of jargon or stuff that's going to go over people's heads. Even though I know I kind of did that already, but that was on purpose, I swear. But keep it legible, simple, and obvious, because when you don't do that, what do you get? You get slides that are complicated and illegible, subtle, and everyone's like squinting and wondering what to read up there. You're going to lose your audience like that. Your audience will become your enemy, and it's never something you want to do in any presentation, whether you're giving it live or it's something that somebody's going to be reading. But you also don't have to be like a graphic designer. So like when I'm building presentations, I do have a bit of a graphic design background, so there are some benefits to that, but That's not something I want you to worry about so much. Really, what you want to do is to optimize for clarity and understanding, not just beauty. So back to the lipstick on a pig thing. So, if the content's not there, you can make it look great, but it's still not really going to be anything anyone's going to be curious about, right? And also what I want you to consider is you will have, when you get really good at this, you're going to have what we call more than one pitch deck. Because again, it depends a lot on how we're delivering this. So sometimes when you secure a meeting, maybe with a big investor or potential stakeholder, they're going to say, send me your pitch deck. So you email something ahead of time. What do you email them versus what do you present live, right? Like you could send them the same thing. It's okay, but it's not really something I'm going to advise, because when someone's sitting there reading a slide presentation or a document, their attention span and what they notice is going to be very different than when you're up here presenting live, right? And so there's also, for example, the demo day presentation, you have to be really excited and you're talking to a lot of people from all walks of life. So it has to be a much more generalized type of presentation. So the information that you're showing up there is going to be different as well. So I want you to keep that in mind. And what I can do is show you an example of how that works a little bit. Something that I call content parsing. So typically in a pitch deck, for example, what we're going to look at is the problem slide. So this is a typical type of slide where it looks okay, right? It's talking about a problem with email currently. And I can see, just as I put this on, you all started reading, right? And so what you're doing is you're tuning out the presenter. I mean, that was intentional. And how can I present this better? I could maybe build in some animations or something to kind of keep you a little bit more in line. That's okay. But you can also do content parsing. So first, the example I would say is on the visual side. One thing to look at is, so this is the same information. This is what I call a much more scannable type of slide. So in pitch decks, because investors who are getting these, they're like HR managers who get tons of resumes per day. Venture capitalists are getting hundreds of pitch decks. They're getting pitched all the time. And so how do you stand out? How do you make it a little bit more noticeable? This is one example where they took the information and made it a little bit more visual. Again, you don't have to be a graphic designer. This is something that I would say is a little bit more advanced, but when you think about it a little bit differently, you'll get a slide like this. Now, would I present something like this to you live? I would say no, because this is still something really good to send to somebody, right? But if I'm giving a live presentation, how would I present this information and still keep your attention with me, keep the conversation? This is content parsing. So what I would do is I would maybe have a slide like this. Email is the most important business communication channel. We send 215 billion emails per day. 54% of those are business emails. But email is still growing at a good rate, 7% year over year. But it's really a tool at its nature designed for personal use. It's not good for business. It's not collaborative. It leads to bad productivity. And it's also highly error. So again, what did I just do there? That was the same information, right? But I presented it in a different way where I kept it more conversational. I kept your attention on me. And that's a much better way to consider presenting or doing something live in a pitch presentation or any type of presentation. So that was a little bit of a segue, but what I want you to know is format matters, your audience matters, and the delivery matters. So always try to consider that before you put anything together, because you want to make sure that that conversation, first and foremost, is something that you can keep with your audience. And even when we have some of these slide issues and stuff, we can still just talk. And those types of conversations are going to be the most resonant. The other thing I'll cover without going too deep, because I can nerd out on this for hours, is the story. So the story elements, outside of all this kind of boring, technical stuff, the story is what matters. And I always argue the story is what matters most. The story is about finding your why. So remember this, big diagram that we covered of all the building blocks to put in, and how story is that thread woven throughout. The story, again, is the lifeblood of your pitch and that conversation. I use the word resonate a lot. And resonate just means it connects with your audience at a level beyond all this technical stuff, beyond the jargon. It's something that somebody, again, will align with your vision and what it is you're talking about. A good way to think about it, too, is stories are like drinking the Kool-Aid. So when you get people who understand what it is that you're working on, they want to do whatever they can to help you, right? Whether that's financially, whether that's through connections or introductions. whether that's through, a good story will also get your first team members on board. If you're hiring a team or partners, they have to understand what it is you're doing and they have to believe in the business, right? So that's where that story becomes really resonant, and that's really where that can be really powerful. Think about some of the best stories we have in kind of our cultures. These are sometimes thousands of years old or older. These are stories that we still tell. Like, why do they still resonate with us? They're really powerful in that way. Things I don't have time to cover today are like the science and the structure. So people think of stories as very abstract, but there is a very specific science to it. There's actual like chemicals in our brain that release when we are engaged in a good story. And that can be used in a pitch, for example, as well as the structure. There's many different types of narrative structures that are identified and they're used in pitches, in presentations, in storytelling or advertising or marketing or movies or screenplays, many different types. We don't have time to cover that today, but I will give you an example where I think this will make a little bit more sense. So the example I'm going to give you is Spanx, which is a women's, and I guess it's now men's also like shapewear company, which I think you're probably familiar with it. But the founder, again, when she was building the business, she was pitching people and she had to talk about the business. And so this is a good example of what we call a founder story. And we're going to watch a little bit of a video. The video may have some technical issues, but just listen to it. That's the most important part.
One day, in a frustrated moment, couldn't figure out what to wear under my white pants, like so many women, I cut the feet out of control top pantyhose and threw them on under the pants, and they worked perfectly. They created the perfect canvas. They didn't leave any lines. I smoothed everything out, but they rolled up my legs all night. And so I said, I got to figure out how to make this stop comfortably below the knee and create a whole new type of undergarment for women that was in between traditional underwear that we had to choose from and the heavy-duty shaper's girdle.
Okay, so that was like 30 seconds. Okay, so that was like an elevator pitch, specifically where she talked about her founder story. The founder story is, how did you as the founder, as the entrepreneur, how did you encounter this problem in the market? And how did you create that solution? And why didn't you just settle for what that solution was currently or what the status quo was? Why did you actually try to change it and go out there and build something? And how did you actually achieve that? Because you survived. You tried to come up with a new solution and it worked. Now you want to make that's your business. So the founder story, the origin story, is also called the hero's journey. And this is a very common type of story structure that's used in these types of pitches, but also in other examples, which I'll show you. But it's very powerful she talked about her problem, she talked about the solution, she talked about from an emotional level, how that made her feel and why she wanted to build that business. She did it in like 30 seconds, but she was still able to get a captive audience and make somebody relate. And even men, this is a business that was intentionally built for women, but she's pitching out there, she's talking to a lot of guys because guys, it's a male-dominant industry of venture capital. And so she had to find a way to still find some relatability, even though her business was much more geared towards women and the problems that they deal with in what they wear every day, how they want to look. But she was still able to capture that in a very quick, succinct conversation. And again, the hero's journey is used in a lot of different types of media, classical novels, contemporary novels, popular movies, The Lion King, The Goonies. This is all about, it's as much about the hero as it is about the journey, because we went off on this far off land or this grand journey where there was plenty of monsters in our path, lots of challenges that we faced, but we came back, we survived, and we lived to tell the tale. And the reason that's so powerful, that is so powerful, is because the journey is transformative. But that's for an origin story as a founder, that's a story that can be really powerful when you are incorporating it into your pitch. And it's just one example. There's other types of stories that you can include as well. But this is a really common one, and I think it's very relatable when you listen to it. And as an aside, I'm a big Goonies nerd, and so I went to a story a few years ago, and I highly recommend doing the whole Goonies tour if you ever get a chance. And so one more thing on story that I'll end with is people often ask me the question of, what's more important, like having a good story or having, the best business plan or the best people on my team or being first to market in something. And I always say that story is obviously I'm biased, but I say that story is actually more powerful because I don't know if you know who this is, but this is Elizabeth Holmes, who is the founder of the now defunct startup that was called Theranos. There's a great Hulu series about her. She recently got convicted of defrauding her investors out of billions. But she had a great story. I think she's a psychopath, but she had a great story.
Yeah.
She was able to get people from top companies like Apple and the Department of Defense, like these top people. She got them all to suspend their disbelief in something and go against their normal nature of due diligence and say, hey, I'm committing to your cause, here's $100 million or something. And she did all of that without proof. So they were not able to show any proof. They were never hitting the marks. They were hiding stuff. They were obfuscating the information. And she still was able to raise billions. And she was even featured on the covers of like Time and on Fortune and everything. Her story's really sad because I thought the idea was great, but they couldn't bring it to market. But she basically lied and defrauded people with millions. I'm not saying to do that. What I'm saying is that this is a great example of how story can be so powerful that people will, suspend their disbelief, and they may, we like to think of ourselves as rational characters, but we actually, we make a lot of our decisions from our more vestigial brain versus our logical center. And so when you can tap into that, that's the secret of like marketing and advertising, and it's a way to get people on your level and to connect with you at a much deeper level than just the surface. And that's really where a lot of interesting changes can be made. And the one more thing I'll leave you with is facts tell, but stories sell. So again, we can have all the great, numbers and data that we can show, but that's not actually where we're connecting. We're connecting on the more human side of it and on the emotional side of it. And when we can incorporate that, again, that's where the magic happens. Last thing I'll leave you with. So again, maybe you're not currently in a stage where you're raising money or don't think you need to raise money. But this is a common quote that's thrown around entrepreneurial circles of, if you want money, ask for advice. And if you want advice, ask for money. Because it's never really going to go the way you think it's going to go. And you may be presented with opportunities that you didn't even think of. But again, that's where you need a pitch deck. That's where you need to make sure that you can pitch somebody on something, because you may have an opportunity in front of you that you didn't dream of, but you have to pursue it because it's right there. And keep this in mind too, because it never works out the way that you intended. And so with that, I will leave it for questions. Hopefully I didn't get too long. And again, it's a lot that we covered in very short time, so I apologize if a lot of this may have gone over your head, but I'm happy to explain things more in detail. I have plenty of presentations I give on this, and I nerd out on it all the time. So thank you for being here with me today, and I hope that this was helpful.
A question on the pitch decks, is there softwares that I've tried doing them on my own, and it's like,
Well, that's a good thing. I've been doing this for so long that I started from just like PowerPoint, right?
Right.
And building things from doing research and reading books or whatnot. But now that you can go into like Canva, which is an online design tool. But within Canva, they have presentation templates and they have like pitch deck templates. So they'll give you a template that has all the information and they'll train you on what is the problem that you're solving? Fill this out. And then, so it's a great starter tool for getting your initial pitch deck together. What I would say is, after that, give it some more identity, either visually through branding, so like your logo and your colors, your typefaces and all that, but also think a little bit more outside the box from what we start with, because it's less about 15 slides or covering all of these areas. It's more about who am I presenting to? What does that conversation look like? And what do I need to make sure it sticks with that? And so, but yeah, Canva is a great tool. Even like PowerPoint now, they're all incorporating like AI and stuff. So there's great entrepreneurial resources to get off the ground to start with. And I can actually send Derek some of this too, or some links, as well as the copy of that rubric and all that, and the book Get Back, which I recommended, because great places to start to get some ideas on how these pitch decks look and how to put them together.
and the pitch decks, the number of pages, it would just depend on what you're marketing, right?
Yeah, but I would say less is more.
Right.
So try to start with something within if it's a slide presentation, like 10 slides. And again, that's an extension of the elevator pitch. So it's like, how do we talk about what I'm doing in a very short time? Start there and write down the paragraph of problem, solution, my vision, what the market looks like, and then you can start applying that to the presentation. But yeah, less is more. You can always throw the kitchen sink at them in the appendix. So usually the way these like formal pitches will go is you send something ahead, so you can have a lot more dense information in send ahead. You present something more high level, and then there's a lengthy question and answer type of thing. And so maybe they're going to ask you something much more specific about like your technology, or tell me more about the other competition or the customer of the market. Maybe you have some more information or research to show them in the appendix. So that's why the number of slides will vary a lot.
We have a question from the online audience. Question is, how far into your vision should you go for an investment, such as use of funds for short term or 1 to 3 years, or you're talking investment impact 5 to 10 years out?
When you as the founder laying the vision, you can have a lot of fun, get really creative, but you are in the clouds there. So start in the clouds, because that is like your grand vision of everything checks off. And everything works and everyone loves what I did and I changed the world. But then you have to backtrack to, okay, but to get there, what am I going to do in the next 6 months? What am I going to do in the next 2 years? And so starting from the top and backtracking, you can start to connect those dots a little bit. Those are actually the milestones or the phases that you start to build out. And that's going to help you answer that question of maybe somebody loves the idea that you have, like, how are you going to achieve this? So you can tell them, well, we're going to start here. And in the first year, we're going to, do X, Y, Z. The example I use there is Elon Musk. So, his ultimate goal is to go to Mars and have people there, right? He also has a lot of other businesses. But, how did he sell those investors initially on that idea? He had to start somewhere, right? I also think he's a psychopath, but he's also a great visionary and also getting people to, commit to his cause, right? And so, when you can sell somebody on the vision, but also articulate it in a way that's going to make sense, that's where you can move the needle on the best also. Anything else?
I have another question
Okay.
from online. So they asked, is there a slide range for like each of the different types of pitch decks that you mentioned?
So what I would say is, it goes back to the stage that you're in. So early stage, I would try to get away with maybe 5 slides, and that's hard ask. So I said to start at 10, and that's okay. Like I can be very nitpicky about this stuff, but less is more, and that's a big thing, because depending on who you are pitching this to, you want to assume they don't have a lot of time, and we're all easily distracted. And so how am I going to capture their attention really quickly? So if I have like a slide full of all of those details, but I'm actually there presenting it, maybe a picture is fine. Like that's all I can show on the screen. But if it's something I'm sending ahead, like where I have to put all the information in there, I would still challenge myself to try to get it to 5 to 8 slides at the early stage. At the later stage, by then usually it's not just, for example, it's not just like a founder by themselves building. They probably have a team, and it's a much larger endeavor. And so they're going to know a lot more what actually needs to be in it, because a lot of that's proof. And so they're going to have to show financials and KPI, talk about phase 3 of the process. And those they can get away with a lot more, and those decks can sometimes be 20 to 40 slides, and that's okay. It's a very different type of pitching platform. But start small and build on it from there. Whatever.
I'm curious about your role at the Active Capital. You're the chief storyteller. Are you?
Yeah, that's a good question, because I actually refer to myself as operating partner now, because the confusion that comes out of it is I'm the one telling the stories, and I'm not really that person. The analogy I use is like I pull it out. And so, but yeah, what I'm doing there at Active is the same stuff. So I'm working with founders who are at various stages of capital raising. And so it's putting together these pitch decks. It's getting the narrative down. It's pitch to me as a layperson or as your grandmother, like make it make sense to me, because it has to make sense to them, right? And so Active venture capital firms, what they do is they invest in startups, and those startups are also raising money, which we call runway, because the end goal of a venture capitalist is we raise money for a fund, and venture capital firms have their own investors, and so those investors have to make a return on their capital. And so the way they make a return in a venture capital fund is these companies will grow, they get big, and they become like Facebook or something. and they exit for billions of dollars. And so for a fund that raised maybe like, I don't know, 10 million, 20 million, but had a company that exited for like 300 billion, like that's a huge return on the money, right? And so the objective is to make sure these startups survive. And so the way they survive is they raise more capital. And so they're pitching, they're sending pitch decks, they're having these presentations. Now, if you talk to me like in 2020, 2021 versus now, the market is really different. So especially software products were like on fire. Like Zoom, like, you know, blew out of the atmosphere in 2020, 2021, because everybody was at home. If you look at Zoom now, like it's a much different story. And so that's a very different investment story also. It's harder to raise capital. Interest rates are also higher. So it's everyone tighten the reins. And so founders have to be very smart about, you know, where their expenditures are. And so they have to be very lean in their operations. But when they can talk about that in a pitch, that makes a much better case for them in raising more capital versus somebody saying, oh, I'm just, you know, funding something that's not really going anywhere, right? So it's a harder, more challenging time right now for founders in raising capital, but there's still ways to do it. So anything else? All right, then.
Another round of applause.
Thank you. Okay.
All right, well, great presentation by Alfred. Hopefully you guys leave today having learned more about how to structure a pitch deck. There's a lot to it, as you can see, lots of different types of decks, when to use the decks. So hopefully today's session was valuable. In terms of next steps, so next month we'll be back. We're doing a session on IP strategy and protection. So we'll be back March 28th here in Harlingen. So if you guys have the ability to make it, we'd love to see you again. Any questions? Feel free to ping myself.
Will you be sending us reminders?
Yes, ma'am.
Oh.
Yep, so we'll add email addresses to our list for those of you who are attended today, and we'll make sure to send this out. Awesome. Thanks so much, guys. Appreciate you being here.
Thank you.
That's gonna be a great session next month because it's really talking about your really moving position.